Sony revealed the PS5 a few days ago, and it looks like a white taco filled with black meat. Who designed this thing? Who thought this was a good look? It's like someone went up to a 10-year-old and said, "Draw a vagina." It doesn't look like that. You know you've done a bad job when a literal box looks better than your design. Along with the reveal were several games, including a preview for Spider-Man Miles Morales. Miles was introduced in the Insomniac Spider-Man game a few years ago, and he was utterly insufferable, but still not as annoying as Mary Jane. Obviously he ends up getting spider powers from a spider that hangs out on MJ for hours until she randomly bumps into Miles. The moment I saw Miles was in the game, I knew they'd go this route. I've never been a fan of the character. He comes across as a third-rate color swap of Peter, but with none of Peter's problems. He's been poorly written for most of the 10 years he's been around, and doesn't seem to have any defining moment in his history that isn't related to Peter. If after 10 years you can't tell me why this character is unique, he's a boring character. And because I feel that way, I knew that if the sequel would focus on Miles, I wouldn't buy it. There were rumors that the new game was actually DLC, but Insomniac released a statement on Twitter clarifying that it is indeed a full game, which makes this Vice article even dumber. Gita Jackson complains in the article that black people are always the side story. Gita says, quote, "Though the teaser was brief, I couldn't hide my glee. I've wanted to play as Miles Morales, the black Spider-Man that is beloved by the fandom, since I first saw that character would make an appearance in Insomniac's Spider-Man game. Turns out, this game is just a side story. I should have known." Yes, you should have known to wait for more information before running off to pin a bitch fest about this bullshit. These games were just announced. Give the developers time to get the information out before attacking them. Then Gita says, quote, "Black people are used to being DLC, side stories, and expansion packs. There are very few games where black characters are the leads. Though one such game was announced last night, Arcane's Deathloop. Black video game protagonists are so rare that I can count them on my fingers. I am glad that Miles Morales, a very good boy who has never done anything wrong, will join that list." What does Miles being a good purse puppy have to do with anything? Does he have to be a good person? Can't he be morally ambiguous or compromised? Why are you so worried about this? Gita goes on to say that Insomniac clarified that this is a standalone game, which again makes this article pointless. Gita already knew this was a standalone game but bitches about it anyway, proving yet again that you can't win with SJWs. They will always find some reason to complain even when you give them exactly what they want. Quote, "A source told Bloomberg News that it is similar in scope to Uncharted Lost Legacy, which is more of a spin-off than a full-length game. I just think it's really lame that we won't get a full-on 60-hour video game where I can play as the Brooklyn born and bred web-slinger. Or you could just play the game again." Just a thought. The original game wasn't even 60 hours long, so I don't know what you're talking about. The full campaign was about 20 to 30 hours, and the DLC adds maybe an additional 10 to 15 hours. You're just complaining to complain. You're literally getting what you want. You get to play as the blandest, most boring knockoff character ever. Stop bitching. If you're desperate to play as Miles because you've apparently realized vanilla is technically black, you can play the campaign over and over and over and over again. I played through Spider-Man 4 times. It's not difficult, Gita. Stop trying to be a victim. But Gita continues, quote, "When I learned that Insomniac wouldn't be making a full-length game about Miles, you don't know how long the game will be, so stop whining about it. It was hard to feel any surprise alongside my disappointment. The industry has been clear. It sees black protagonists as a risk and thinks it's safer to A/B test them alongside larger, bigger budget offerings featuring white protagonists. Or, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and that's the character everyone actually wants to play, and see his story continue from the first game. It could be a conspiracy to keep out the darkies, or it could just be finishing the fucking story. Stop jumping to conclusions based on nothing. Insomniac would be stupid to throw away Peter and replace him with Miles. The better option would be to make a spin-off game, probably test what they can actually do on the PS5, and then have that connect to Spider-Man 2. They were always going to include Miles in the series somehow, but it's ridiculous to think they scrapped Peter when so many fans want to see Venom, the Green Goblin, and a number of other Spidey villains. There's plenty of story to tell with Peter, so he should be the focus. At this point, Gita runs out of idiotic arguments and just resorts to straw men. Quote, "I know it's anecdotal, but from my perspective, the black community at large has always loved video games, ever since Biggest Smalls was rapping about Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis in 1994. Black folks loved video games before '94, Gita. There are those of us who were born before that year who play video games. This is nothing new, and I really doubt that Biggie made that many niggas play games. Stop it. Every single black man I have ever known has played Battlefield. If you get on a bus around the time school gets out in New York, you'll hear black teenagers talking about the games they're playing, about to play. Hell, the black community was one of the only ones to latch onto Sony's efforts to get into the handheld market with the PlayStation Vita. Now you're just making shit up. Nobody bought the Vita. Even the Japanese didn't buy the Vita. And nobody's denying that black people play video games. What you should keep in mind is that the games aren't being made with specific ethnic groups and races in mind. Most Western developers are white, and like I say, people write what they know and what interests them. It's unlikely that most developers are going to make stories about other races, especially in this climate where people like you will attack them for writing about someone else's so-called lived experiences. You created the dynamic that makes developers afraid to make games with minority leads. Deal with it. On top of that, black people have always loved and read comics, and ever since Into the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales has become an icon in the black community, beyond just the die-hard nerds. So, black people have always loved and read comics, but they didn't know about a 10-year-old character until a movie came out a few years ago, which incidentally is nothing at all like the character from the comic. You really didn't put a lot of effort into this, did you, Gita? How would it be a risk to put black characters front and center, especially this black character? Those players are already there, waiting for it. You mean the same people who've been hardcore Miles Morales fans for a decade, so much so that his comic barely sells. The same people who couldn't name a single supporting cast member from his comic. The same people who can't tell you a damn thing about Miles besides what they assume is his race. He's actually half black, half Puerto Rican. The same people who didn't go to see Into the Spider-Verse in theaters, resulting in a $376 million box office in the middle of Marvel's MCU hype. Yeah, I can see they were just gagging for it. The question isn't why is Miles the star of a side story, but why isn't Miles the main character of this franchise? Because Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and Miles is a third-rate knockoff nobody actually cares about. They don't like Miles. They like the idea of Miles. If you got rid of the character today, no one would care. They'd care more if you killed Kane than if you killed Miles. Once you start to look at what might motivate a company to release smaller, shorter games with black protagonists, or why these characters can only tell their stories in expansions and DLCs, you'll paint a pretty unflattering portrait of the video game industry. Yes, one that says they're focused on the actual main characters of the franchises. So unflattering. They want black players to know they're appreciated, so they'll develop the game with Miles Morales, but black players can't expect the same depth of experience that their white peers do. It's separate, supposedly equal. Shut the fuck up, you self-absorbed race baiter. I'm black. I want to play as Peter, the real Spider-Man. I'm not interested in his knockoff purse puppy. Nothing about the game made me feel unappreciated because, unlike you, I don't need every character to look like me. I can just enjoy the experience and story because, unlike you, I actually like Peter Parker as a character, not as a token to be waved around to prove my wokeness. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.